Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Hillary Garrity. We are going to begin day 2 of the Community-Wide Scheduling Online Seminar. If we could do the same thing as we did yesterday morning, if somebody could just acknowledge by raising their hand through Zoom that they can hear me okay, we will go ahead and get started. Perfect. Thank you, everybody. Okay, so we're going to go ahead, and the first part of this morning is going to be a review of your parameters, and that is going to include both the toolbox parameters as well as your customer-defined parameters. We're going to take a small break after we review the parameters, and we are going to then take the rest of the day to review the scheduling desktop with specialist Stephanie Tom. So I'm going to go ahead and get started by reviewing your toolbox parameters. And the one thing I do want to mention about your toolbox parameters, if you're not familiar with them already, is that they are parameters that can only be edited or changed by your meta tech specialist. You do have the ability to add the view routine to your MPA if your users should have access to view them, but you don't have access to actually go in and make changes. So if you see anything that needs to be changed as we go through the presentation, that's something that you would need to open a task with your CWS specialist for and request those changes, and then we would need to have appropriate change control. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and walk through the different fields here in our community-wide scheduling toolbox parameters. So on the main tab here, as a meta tech specialist, I'm able to be in edit mode, so this will allow us to go through the different values. The first field that is required, and this will be done when you start the implementation process. If you're already with service and have had 6.1 for quite some time, then this will already be filled out. But it's the exclude historical accounts after X days old. So this is where you're going to set the number of days that will pass before historical accounts are no longer going to be included in your appointment searches. So for example, if you don't want to include accounts that are older than a year, as we have in this example, you would enter 365. The field below that is not a required field. This is your incoming files folder. This field, this parameter, is where you're going to dictate the pathway to your incoming files folder. That's part of your process incoming files desktop functionality. If you have the process incoming files desktop working and it is part of your workflow, then this field is already going to be filled out. If you're not utilizing that feature, then this field would be blank. And then we have 3 fields here which are specific to the interface of the HL7 appointment status messages. So if you were to enable that outbox queue, then the following fields below are going to be available to you. If this is something that you're currently using or would like to utilize, it's something that you would most likely open a task with your community-wide specialist and work with your NMI specialist as well. For today, we're not going to be looking at any interfaces or any outbox messaging queues, so we're going to leave these fields blank for today. On your facilities tab, this is where you're going to determine which facilities are used by your organization and which are actively included in appointment searches. If you choose to build your critical concepts for a particular facility, you must have that facility included here in your toolbox parameters. For the highlighted facility, below you're going to indicate the midnight run start time. And this can be determined by your organization. If you have multiple facilities, you may want the midnight run to start a couple of minutes apart per facility, and you would indicate that for each midnight run start field for the highlighted facility above. Today we are only working with one facility within our training ring, and we have the midnight run starting immediately at midnight. On the notifications tab, this is where you're going to determine various notification settings within the CWS software. So you can determine whether or not you're going to enable or disable your appointment reminder functionality, which is a yes or no field, the letter functionality, your email functionality, the email delivery method. This is going to be both NPR and MAT, and that's going to also be dictated by the email service that you have within your organization. And then you're also going to determine whether you're allowing for message functionality. So those fields are going to be yes or no, or as we indicated with the email delivery method, that's either your MPR code or MAT code, depending on the email service. On the performance tab, this is going to actually be a field that is going to be utilized between development, and it's also where a performance log becomes available between or within your toolbox integrity and maintenance routine. This is used for data logging criteria. You have the ability with the enable performance filter, which is yes or no, to determine whether or not you're going to be compiling data for community-wide scheduling. If you were to hit yes here to enable the performance filter, then you have access to the performance operation, and this is where you would dictate the different types of operations that would start logging data for you. We are going to leave this field blank for today. And then the last field within your toolbox parameters is going to be the features page. And the features is used specifically for Meditech development only. So this is a tool that the Meditech development team will utilize if they're going to enable or disable certain functionalities or enhancements that come through either through top-offs or updates or moving in a specific change. So this is a tool specifically for development and not anything that you would need to monitor or look at. So with an understanding of our toolbox parameters, we're going to jump into your customer-defined parameters. And within your customer-defined parameters, this is where you have a lot of opportunity to customize how the software works, more on a global level, and we'll be going through all of those fields in detail. So to get there, we're going to take the pathway of administrative, community-wide scheduling, dictionaries, and your top option. Before I launch into the customer-defined parameters, I do want to point out here that we have the toolbox parameters routine. So this is where I mentioned that you do have the ability to add it to your user's MPA so that they can view the settings of those parameters, but notice they don't have the edit capacity, and that is standard and not anything that can be changed. So moving back into our menu, we're going to launch directly into our customer-defined parameters. And I'm going to go into our edit mode so we can go through each field individually. So we're going to start on our general tab looking at our first field, which is the compliancy days. So this is going to be a free text field that allows you to enter in the number of days up to 999 that defines how far back in time users can view a patient's compliancy data. We saw yesterday within the CWS Access that you have the ability to determine the ability to have access to the compliancy data. This field is going to tell you how far back that data will be viewable by your users. We have the maximum time allowed to hold slots. So this is where we enter that maximum number of days, hours, or minutes that a time slot is held in the resource mode of the scheduler desktop. If we enter in a plain numerical value, the system is going to assume the time is entered in minutes. So for instance, if we were to enter in 15, the system is going to assume 15 minutes. This is where if you were to cancel or reschedule an appointment for a patient and you wanted to hold that time slot for the wait list, this is going to be that global setting where the system would determine how long they're holding that time slot for. If you make any specific changes on the front end, that will obviously take effect in the system, but this is a global setting for how long to hold those time slots for. If we were to leave this field blank, I did want to just point that out, if we were to leave this field blank, the system's going to hold that time slot indefinitely, regardless of the reserved time slot is used or unused. So it would be recommended if you are leaving time slots for the wait list and holding them to identify a value so that way you do clean up your schedule for the resource and that resource can be utilized for patient appointments. Next, we have two fields that are specific to the questionnaires, and this is going to be specific to the demographic questionnaire for patients when you're booking appointments. So the first one is the HIM edit questionnaire. It is a required field. It's looking to your registration questionnaire dictionary, and this is where the questionnaire will be determined that is used to collect that demographic data when you're booking patients on a brand new account. This questionnaire screen appears when you choose to create a new patient during that booking process. So your lookup is to the registration questionnaire, and that's going to determine the type of information that your users will be required to fill out or to view when they are creating that new appointment for the patient. You also have to identify the HIM view questionnaire, as we can see here that it's required as well. And this is where you're going to look to that reg questionnaire, and you will determine the questionnaire that will be used to view the demographic data of a pending appointment for patients without an account number. Below that, we have our default medical record document. Now, this is not a required field. It does look to your medical record document dictionary, which is housed over in MIS. And here you have the ability to pull in a medical record document that would file to your file category if you are utilizing the Process Incoming Files desktop. In our quarterly WebEx for the Process Incoming Files desktop, we talk about this field at length because we also saw it in our file category dictionary yesterday when Sam went over the dictionary, and this is where the document would be linked to a file category, and that's how you process your files through the Process Incoming Files desktop. If there is no medical record document that's linked to the file category, then when you process the file, it actually will look to this field here. So as I had mentioned in the beginning, your customer-defined parameters are more global, and then there are some fields throughout other dictionaries that will override this. So this is going to be a global setting and would apply to all files as you process them, unless, of course, you have a medical record document that has been linked to a specific file category, like we saw yesterday. We are going to leave this field blank for today, and we'll move on to the defaults for our patient list formats for both department mode and patient mode. So for department mode, this is where you would pull in your default patient list format for when users sign on to the department mode of the scheduler desktop. If your access has a different patient list format and or your user preferences has a different patient list format, that will override whatever setting you have here. So if your users do not have one defined in their access and they do not have user preferences set up, then the patient list format that they will be seeing when they enter department mode will come from this field. The same is going to apply here for patient mode. Below that, we have labels. And labels is where you're going to customize the wording for the following. For group patient label, for a single group, your label could be anything that you customize, so this is free text. If you have more than one group, what would your label want to be? Here we have it listed as member and members respectively. And then your label for recurring. This is seen in the scheduler desktop, and we'll see this a little bit later in the presentation. When you're in patient mode and you want to book a series of appointments for a patient, the label that shows on that button when you want to process that routine is what's going to pull from this field here. So we'll see series/recurring as our label within the scheduler desktop. Again, those three fields are completely customized by your organization. And then we also have email defaults. So the first is email from name, and this is where you can use free text to enter the name of the user from which notifications are being sent from when an appointment is booked within community-wide scheduling. Email default, this is important to know that in order for these to actually apply anywhere in the system, you must have event notifications set up. So when you're booking an appointment and you're generating a message and that message is in the form of an email, here you can have your email default, so it tells you where the email is coming from, and then you can also determine the address that it's coming from. We've left those fields blank for today in our training ring, but that's something that you can customize within your organization. Once we have those filled out to our liking, you'd move on to the facility tab. So within the facility tab, The list of facilities that you have at the top here is going to drive from your toolbox parameters. So we identify the facilities available for community-wide scheduling in our toolbox parameters. That's pulling forward, and now we can customize appointment statuses, notifications, the health portal, etc., all based on that facility. We have one facility in our training ring, as we've already mentioned multiple times, which is Canton Hospital. So as that's highlighted, we'll move on to our main tab. On the main tab, we have two required fields that are regarding specifically the questionnaires when you are registering and scheduling an appointment on an account. Looking at the first one, we have default reg questionnaire. As I mentioned, it is required, and it's where we're going to pull in a questionnaire that will collect the patient information when users are booking or editing an appointment with an existing account. So this looks to your reg questionnaire dictionary. And right below that, we have the default reg view questionnaire, which is also required, and we're going to enter in the questionnaire where we would be viewing the patient information from a CWS appointment. These two fields also, as we saw yesterday, exist within the Access Dictionary. So this is another example where if the setting in your Access Dictionary differs from your customer-defined parameters, your Access Dictionary will override those settings. So should you have different questionnaires pulled into your Access, those are going to be the questionnaires that you will be utilizing as a user within CWS. Right below that, we have a section where we pull in questionnaires that are associated to registration types that need to check required fields upon pre-registering an account. So when we do a lookup in our registration type column, we have all of our hard-coded registration types. By pulling in clinical, we are now required to pull in a questionnaire. This will look to the questionnaire dictionary for that clinical registration type, specifically also for the pre-registration process. So if you recall yesterday, I had talked about within the appointment type dictionary, the appointment group dictionary, that there's the ability to auto-pre when you're booking a specific appointment type. And there were three components to that functionality. One is the appointment type needs to be set up to do so. Two was that you as a user have to have access to do so. And three was that the questionnaire had to be pulled into your customer-defined parameters to require that check when there are required fields. So as long as your registration type is pulled in here and you've identified the pre-registration questionnaire, then when you are booking that appointment type on a clinical account and you have access to do so, the system will launch you into the questionnaire, you'll fill out any required fields, and the account will be placed into a pre-status. If the questionnaire doesn't have any required fields that aren't already completed, then you'll be able to just immediately launch into, or immediately file the appointment into a pre-status. So this box here is very important in order for you to be able to have that functionality to auto-pre your appointment. Below that, we have a few parameters that are specific to your process through booking. The first one is actually a training printer. This is where you would enter a printer when you are implementing the application and you are training your staff on questionnaires and the process of CWS. We're going to leave that blank because we're not in training mode at this point. And if you are or have been in service or with Meditech and 6.1 for quite some time, most likely you are not utilizing that training printer. But it's good to know that it's there. The parameter below that is to show the guarantor bad debt message. It's a yes or no message, and it allows you to be able to have that message prompted and populate for your users. Should a patient have guarantor bad debt, that message is going to populate with this set to yes. Right below that, we have our auto-populate provider, and this will automatically populate that provider field when you have an appointment that's being booked with a resource that's linked to a provider. We saw that yesterday throughout the build of the resource dictionary and linking it to a person. If that person is linked up and this field auto-populate provider is set to yes, then that provider will automatically populate into your provider field when booking the appointment. Although it auto-populates, it certainly could be changed at the time of booking. It's just the default and saves your users an extra click. Auto-populate attending/other provider is when you want to have an appointment provider appear by default at the attending provider field in the registration application. So this is a yes or no field. So if you have a user that's entered an appointment provider using free text instead of selecting from the provider lookup, the provider will land in the other provider field. If you pull in a provider from the provider lookup as opposed to free texting it, that provider will land in the attending provider field. Again, that functionality only exists when this field is set to yes. Include other locations on ED visits. So this is a yes or no field as well, and when it's set to yes, you're automatically going to add the appointment location to the other location field when you're booking appointments that are on existing emergency department accounts. If you don't want those appointments on an ED account to have the location land on the other location field, then you would set this to no. And then for any organization that is utilizing Meditech's health portal, this enable health portal field is yes or no, and by selecting yes, it's going to allow you to enable the health portal in the ambulatory and community-wide scheduling applications for that highlighted facility above. If you have multiple facilities, maybe the health portal is not available for all of your facilities, so you may need to adjust this accordingly. But if your portal is available for all facilities or you are a single facility organization, just make sure this is set to yes so that you can incorporate the ambulatory and community-wide scheduling applications with the portal. And then below that, we have the locations to update revisit on same date. So this is where we would enter in the locations that we want to have generate a revisit for every attended appointment in the same location with the same date of service. So only one revisit would be logged per location per date of service, but you would indicate the locations here in which you would want that revisit to be created. Moving on to the next tab for our Canton Hospital facility is our appointment status tab. So the appointment status tab here, this is where we're going to customize different actions within the system that will take place with the appointments for our selected facility. So starting with the first one, we have days after latest date to inactivate pending. Here we're going to enter in that number of days that after the date has been entered with the latest possible slot on the wait list before the system will automatically change the status of a pending appointment to an inactive status. Here we indicate that value. So what this is saying is 30 days after the latest date has passed is when a pending appointment will become inactive. Right below that, we have the days after waitlisted date to inactivate pending. So for your pending appointments that do not have a latest date on that appointment, how many days after it's hit the wait list do you want it to become an inactivated pending appointment? And for that, you would enter your numerical value. Next, we have our number of days into the future that we would reserve slots for the waitlisted appointment. What this is telling the system is that how many days into the future will we allow the system to reserve a time slot when that slot becomes available. So here we have 1, which means that if we were to open up a time slot tomorrow where an appointment becomes rescheduled to another date and time or completely canceled, then that time slot has the ability to be reserved for the wait list. If we were to do the same thing, reschedule or cancel an appointment for Friday, according to this parameter, that spot would not be held for the wait list. And then here in our customer defined parameters, right below that, we have the release reserved slots within hours parameter. So once it's been held for the wait list and we have that time slot held, how many hours do we want that spot to be held and then released by the system? Continuing with the idea of waitlist, we have our waitlist priority for rebooked appointment field. We're going to enter in our default waitlist priority that would be assigned to our rebooked appointments at this specific facility. This is going to look directly to your waitlist priority dictionary, which is one of the dictionaries that we saw reviewed yesterday afternoon. And then we also have a waitlist priority default for the pending appointments that become created when an order is placed in OM. That's functionality that needs to be set up in OM, but for any hospital that's using it or interested in using it, the idea is that when you create an order on the clinical side in OM, you can have it associated and linked up to an appointment, and a pending appointment is created so that the patient can be scheduled for the date and time. So the order is already placed, and now we just need to schedule the appointment. When those pending appointments are created, the system is going to look to this parameter to determine what type of priority should be associated to that pending appointment. And that looks to your waitlist priority dictionary as well. The second section, looking at our first field here, is days to allow appointments to be backdated. So it's simply saying how many days in the past are we able to schedule an appointment. It's very possible that sometimes an appointment is missed or does not get scheduled and put into the system even though the patient has physically arrived, has been seen by the provider, and has left the facility. Sometimes those appointments need to be entered into the system. So this is where you're going to tell the system how far back your users have the ability to backdate an appointment. We also have the number of days in the future to retain the wait list. So this is where you'd enter the number of days that the waitlist data is retained by the system after the pending appointment has been changed to a booked appointment. Users are asked if they want to retain that waitlist data when they actually take the pending appointment and convert it into a booked appointment. And if the new booked appointment date and time is equal to or greater than the value here, that is what's going to take effect. So it's essentially just asking you if you want to retain that waitlist information, and you would put in your numerical value here. We also have the number of days to wait to change appointments to no-show. I had referenced this a little bit yesterday when talking about the ability to auto-waitlist an appointment. We talked about the ability to specify appointment types that when the appointment is in a booked status and the system attempts to no-show it, do you want it to be placed on the wait list instead? If that field is set to yes, then it goes onto the wait list. If it's set to no or left blank, the system is going to no-show that appointment. This field, days to wait to change the appointments to no-show, is when the system's going to determine at what point do they actually no-show the appointment. So the value here is what that background job and midnight run is going to look to every night. Change future appointments to discontinued upon discharge. It's a simple yes or no answer. When it's set to yes, it means that if your account is discharged and there were future appointments that existed for the patient on that account, then the appointments will be placed in a discontinued status. If you have it blank or left to no, then the appointments will remain in a book status. The account will still be discharged, but the appointments will remain out there and will continue to take up resource space. Change registered recurring appointments to attended is yes or no as well. When it's set to yes, it means that when you have a registered recurring account and you register it for the first time, the appointment for that data service will become attended. And then any subsequent appointment that exists on that account, assuming the account remains registered, any future or subsequent appointments will become attended by the midnight run for the appropriate date of service. And then we also have our change admitted inpatient appointments to attended, yes or no. If you were to have appointments for a patient and the account becomes admitted and the appointment is on that date of service, do you want the appointment to automatically be attended for that date of service on the date of registration, yes or no? Or excuse me, on the date of admission, yes or no? And we have that set to yes here. And then our last three are going to be in regards to future appointments for expired patients and when accounts are canceled. So we have the first field here, which is change future appointments to canceled when expired. Should a patient expire and they had future appointments, how do you want the system to behave with those future appointments? Here, when you have it set to yes, then those appointments will get canceled by the system. You can also determine if you're utilizing that functionality to tell the system how much time needs to pass before they actually cancel those appointments. It does happen where users accidentally expire a patient in the system when the patient hasn't truly expired, and they have to undo that discharge or undo that routine so that the patient no longer shows in the system as expired. If that happens or has the ability to happen, you might want to give the system an hour before they actually go ahead and cancel all future appointments. It allows just a little wiggle room in case an error is made. If you want all appointments in the future to be canceled immediately upon expiring a patient, then you can leave this field blank. And then for future appointments that do get canceled based off of the patient expiring, you are required to pull in a reason from your reason dictionary, and we saw that dictionary yesterday. You're required to pull in a reason that will be linked to all of those appointments that get canceled. When you view the audit of that appointment that shows in a canceled status, this is going to be the reason that will show within the audit trail. So it would make sense that your reason is specific to the patient being expired. All right, moving on to our notifications tab. So the notifications tab is going to be specific to exactly what it sounds like, notifying patients or notifying users within the system based off of events that are taking place within community-wide scheduling. So this is where we're going to customize how a patient is notified and what you have as available functionality for notification. First, we have letters enabled. This is a yes or no. Do we want to enable the printing of patient notification letters? If you have letters created that are sent to the print queue that get printed and mailed out to a patient, any type of letter that has anything to do with their appointment, you're going to want to make sure that this field is set to yes. Emails enabled is whether or not you want email messages. If you have letters built to be sent to an email recipient group, emailed to the patient, emailed to another user within the system, as any type of notification, you're going to want to make sure that this field is set to yes. And messages enabled is the same idea where you want to allow notifications to be sent to the message/task function. Messages and tasks are a separate routine that is available across multiple applications within Meditech. If you want that to be utilized through community-wide scheduling, you want to make sure that messages is enabled here. Group by patient, this allows you to provide the functionality where you can group all notification letters by patient within your notification management desktop. So with that, when you're utilizing event notification, which is sending out letters to the print queue, sending messages or emails to patients and users within the system, again, based off of events that are taking place within the desktop, when those letters hit the print queue, you have the ability with this set to yes here to group those letters by patient and then print them all at once and be able to mail them out to the patient. It's a great way to be able to filter and link them all together. Group by patient date range. So with the group by patient set to yes, as you can see here, if we have it set to no, we don't have access to this. But if you are grouping by patient, group by patient date range, you're going to enter in a numerical value where you'd have access to the number of days identified here, where you'd be able to group those patient letters together. So you could say that within a 10-day range, all those letters would get grouped together by that one patient. Process in the background is a yes or no field. We have this set to yes, which is going to automatically send patient letters that are CWS patient letters to the MIS queue. And this is where it's automatically sent in the background. If you want to make that a manual process, you would have this set to no. You can also schedule these letters to be sent to the queue specific to a day and specific to a time. Now, depending on the type of appointments that you're working with, if you're looking at recurring appointments, for example, maybe they have multiple appointments throughout one given day, or they have multiple appointments for that week, you might want to have all those letters, which could be appointment reminders, for example, sent out and sent to the print queue first thing on, say, Monday morning. And then Monday morning at 7 a.m., all of the letters for that patient, or the letters for the patient that lists all of their appointments, is going to get sent over to the queue, and then you can print that letter when you come in the office in the morning and mail it out to the patient if you're mailing letters. That might be an example where you would utilize this functionality here. And then we also see here the email from name and email from address. So you have the ability to, as I had mentioned previously, to enter the free text and enter the name of the user from which the notifications are going to be sent when they're booked through community-wide scheduling. And next we have our health portal tab. So as I had mentioned, on the main tab here with our highlighted facility, if I disable the health portal, and so in my enable health portal field, set it to no, I don't have access to the health portal tab. But because I've enabled the health portal for this facility in terms of appointments and community-wide scheduling integrating with the portal application, I have access to this field. I'm going to just briefly go over these fields. If you have any specific portal questions and in terms of the integration with community-wide scheduling, you would want to reach out to your portal specialist on that. But looking at these fields, they're pretty self-explanatory. The first one is allow appointments to be canceled or rescheduled from the health portal. This is global. It can be set on the appointment level, but it's a global setting, and if anything differs on the appointment level, that will override your customer-defined parameters. Yes or no field for that. If you do set that to yes, you have the ability and you are required to define the number of hours where they cannot cancel the appointment from the scheduled date and time of that appointment. So we could say that if it's 5 hours within the appointment start time, they're not able to cancel. Create account numbers. Do you want the ability to have the appointment create account numbers? It's a yes or no field. Default registration type, you're going to assign a default registration type that will come across for requested appointments from the portal. If those appointments come over and land in community-wide scheduling, do you want to default, which registration type do you want to default in? It can be changed at the time of booking. It's just a global default setting. Same is going to apply for your waitlist priority. When an appointment is requested through the portal, if you are not utilizing direct appointment booking and you're utilizing appointment management and requesting an appointment without a date and time, that comes over as a pending appointment. And a pending appointment has a waitlist priority, so you can assign a default waitlist priority. Both of these fields can also be dictated on the appointment level. So again, any settings in your appointment type dictionary will override your customer-defined parameters. And then lastly, within our customer-defined parameters for CWS, we have our visit tracking status. So within your visit tracking status, you have the ability to pull in your location. Now your location lookup is only going to look up to the locations within the facility that you've highlighted on. You want to make sure that that location is set to active. And then once you do, you have the ability to look to your visit status dictionary. We went over the visit status dictionary yesterday. Sam went over it in detail. You have your arrived, seen, and departed, and you can customize different statuses off of these hard-coded statuses. So arrived, seen, and departed are standard in the system, but as she explained yesterday, you can create a more customized status that is then mapped to one of the hard-coded statuses. And you have the ability to pull in all of those statuses per location. Now, this is customer-defined parameters, so these are going to be global. Whatever statuses you pull in here, your users are going to have access to, unless, of course, their access or user preferences differ. And then from there, the access and user preferences will take precedent over what exists here in your customer-defined parameters. it looks like we have a question that came in, so I'm going to go ahead and take a look at that. Okay, Richard, I see your question here. So we're on the notifications tab, and when setting the background print job, which is a global setting, where are the parameters set for each location or each printer? Your printer setup is done with the support of MIS. So you're not defining global printers within community-wide scheduling. You're not defining printers per location within community-wide scheduling. When you build your event notifications and you are telling the system what printer a letter should be sent to, you can pull in from your printer list, but the printer list and the printer setup is done outside of community-wide scheduling. We don't have parameters that associate a printer to a location within community-wide scheduling. If you have further questions on that, you would most certainly want to reach out to your MIS specialist. Did you have any follow-up questions on that, or did anyone else have any questions regarding the parameters for community-wide scheduling? Okay. So it looks like we don't have any other questions for now. If you do have anything or think of anything, certainly put it into the question and answer section or the chat. We'll continue to monitor that. We are going to take a 5-minute break here. Actually, we're going to take a 10-minute break and come back at 10:50, and we will begin the scheduler desktop with Stephanie. Thank you. Hi everyone, sorry about that. We lost connection through our audio. So now I'm going to go ahead and start with the last portion of day 2 for CWS. I am Stephanie Tong. I'm also a scheduling specialist here at Meditech. So now that we saw the build of all of the CWS dictionaries, we're now going to see how everything pulls together on the desktop. We're going to start with patient mode and review all of the function and footer buttons. We'll then see the process of booking and registering an appointment for today. We're going to review the differences of the display, the functions, and the footers within the resource and department modes. So first, to get to the scheduler desktop, we're going to follow the path of administrative, community-wide scheduling, and jump right into the scheduler desktop. So when we enter the desktop, we're going to default into the mode that's defined within Access in the default mode field. So currently that is set to patient mode, so that's where we're defaulting. There are 5 regions of the screen. The very top region here is the header. And this will populate in information when a patient's pulled in or an appointment or time slot is selected. It depends on which mode we're utilizing. The next section is the body. And this section will display information dependent on the mode that we're using. We have our function buttons on the right side of the screen, and these will also vary depending on the user's menu procedure access. And then we have our footer buttons along the bottom. So the footer buttons will also vary. These are going to be dependent on the user's access as well as the mode that we're in. We're going to start with patient mode. This mode is patient-centric, meaning anything done within this mode revolves around one single patient. There are multiple ways that you can pull in a patient through patient mode. So for example, we can pull them in through date of birth. We could pull them in by their social security number. If we had the patient's telephone number, we could also pull them in that way. If the patient had previously been to the hospital and they had an account number, we could pull in their account number. If we happen to know the patient's medical record number, we could also pull that in here. Or we could pull them in by their EMR number. So entering in any of that information with 6-1, you don't need any prefixes. You can just enter in the information. Or you can also pull the patient in by their name using the format of last comma first. So we're now brought to the patient lookup, and the system is currently utilizing the best match search to find a possible match for the criteria that we entered. I'm then presented with 2 Christopher Tongs or 2 Chris Tongs, and because the information that I entered is a more probable best match, you're going to see here that it's displaying in yellow to indicate that it's a more probable match than this possible match below. If we needed to search for the patient by any of those other areas that we could type in previously, we can select any of these function buttons here and also search for the patient that way. We also have the new patient footer. So if the patient did not already exist, sorry about that error, that was just indicating that we couldn't create a new patient unless we entered in the patient's full name and their age. So if the patient didn't exist, we could select that new patient footer button, and then we'll be brought to this screen here where we can enter in the patient's basic information, and then we could go ahead and save that. So upon doing that, after we selected save, we would then be brought back to patient mode where we could go ahead and book an appointment. I don't want to create a new patient today, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel. And I'm going to pull my patient in again. So the Chris Tong that I am looking for, they do exist. It is this top option here. So I'm going to go ahead and select that record, and we can proceed. Now that I selected my patient, I'm being prompted with patient comments, and these are general patient comments that will be on the patient's record rather than on a specific appointment. I'm going to be going over adding patient comments shortly, so for now I'm just going to cancel out of this page. So you can see now that we've selected our patient's information is pulling into the header, and we have some upcoming appointments that are filed into the body. So the format of the list of appointments may vary depending on the patient mode format that's defined within Access. If the user has their own specific user preferences defined, what is defined within the patient mode format will override the Access settings. And there are two modes that can be used to view the patient's appointments. We're defaulting into this list mode, and that's due to our Access default patient mode field being set as list. So this is going to give us a list of the patient's appointments based on the patient list format that we're using. If we were to go ahead and choose type, what this would do is this will group the patient's appointments according to whether they are single, a set, recurring appointments, or group type appointments. So we're going to go ahead and start with our function buttons. The first function is the find function. And this screen will allow us to define search parameters, to locate an available time slot to book an appointment. So first, we need to confirm the patient that we're looking to schedule an appointment for. So I'll pull in Chris Tong. And again, I received my patient comments. I can go ahead and cancel that. And we're required to pull in a patient because this function is available when a patient is not already pulled in as well. So this is just an extra precautionary step to make sure that we are finding an appointment for the appropriate patient. Next, we are going to go ahead and pull in the appointment type that we would like to schedule the patient for. So, for example, Chris is going to need an MRI of the shoulder. We're able to define what type of search we would like to perform. Are we looking for just the first available time slot, Or would we like to pick from a list of available time slots based on the earliest and latest date time criteria below? So in these earliest and latest dates, we can enter in a date range that we would like to schedule the appointment within. In the earliest and latest times, if there was a time this appointment should be scheduled for within a specific time frame, we can also enter that as well. If the patient is not available on specific days of the week, we can also opt to exclude those from the search. So for example, they're not available Friday through Sunday. And I'm going to utilize the pick list search as the information is defined. So now that I've excluded my days and I have a date range that I want to search for, I can go ahead and select search. You can see here that we receive a list of available time slots that meet my criteria. I can select an appropriate date and time. So I'm going to book this appointment for Thursday at 12 p.m. And I can go ahead and select OK. So after we choose the date and time that we want to book this appointment for, we are brought to the booking screen where I can then file the appointment. So I'll just make sure all of my required fields are filled out. And I'm going to be going over this page in more detail. So I'm just going to fill in some options here. And then we can go ahead and file. We're receiving a conflict that this appointment type requires or warns that it should have an authorization attached. You can go ahead and override that. And then we receive a confirmation. So our patient is booked for an MRI of the shoulder on Thursday, December 7th at 12 p.m. And you can go ahead and close that. So you'll see now that the patient's MRI shoulder appointment is now going to display in their list of appointments. The next function is the book option. So this is going to be the booking screen for an appointment with a date and time. We're defaulting to the appointment tab. So you can see up here we have the options between the appointment and the demographics. And this is where we're going to pull in all pertinent information regarding the appointment that we're looking to schedule. In the facility field, you can see that Canton Hospital is defaulting in, and that's based on our access in the default facility for booking field. If this is not the facility that we want to book in, we can go ahead and clear this out and perform a lookup. The ring that we're using right now is only set up for the Canton Hospital, so that is the option that we will select. You're going to also see that new will default into the account field, and this is because we defined yes in the default new account for booking fields and access. If this patient had a pre-existing account that we wanted to book this appointment on, we could also clear this out and perform a lookup, and this would give us a list of available accounts that we could schedule an appointment on. For today, we'll be using a new account. The appointment field, this will look up to the appointment dictionary. So if we know the exact appointment that we're looking for, we can type in the name or the mnemonic. If we only know part of the mnemonic, we can type that in. So, for example, we're going to be booking a PT appointment today. I don't know exactly which one, but I can type in PT and I'll be given a list of all PT appointments. Christopher needs to be scheduled for a PT Bike 30 appointment, so I can go ahead and select that. I'm receiving a warning that the patient has existing appointments, so this patient already has a pending PT Bike 30-minute appointment. I don't want to use that appointment, so I'm going to go ahead and select that. We're then prompted with the instructions that were defined within the appointment dictionary, as well as prompted to answer any queries that are attached to the booking screen for this appointment type. So we can see here that the patient instructions are, please don't drink alcohol before the appointment. And then we also have a list of scheduler instructions to remind the patient to wear comfortable clothing, no jewelry or loose clothing, as well as closed-toed shoes. And then we can go ahead and answer our questions. The first being, is the patient pregnant? I'm going to go ahead and select no to that. My patient also does not have any metal in the body, and my patient is a male. So after all of my questions are answered, I can go ahead and select OK. And then I'll be prompted again with the patient's comment. So after we close out of the comments, we're then brought back to the booking screen. You can see here that the location of physical therapy has already defaulted in, and this is because this appointment type can only be performed in this one location. If this appointment could be performed at multiple locations, we would be able to perform a lookup in this field here, and we would be given all of the options of appointments. Because we're searching by the identifier, you're going to see that physical therapy is the same location, however, it's listed twice. The next field is the reason for visit field, and this field will allow the user to indicate the reason for this appointment. So this is a free text field of up to 50 characters, or if there are entries within the MIS reason for visit dictionary that are set up for this facility, you can also perform a lookup here and pull in a reason, such as Chris just had a recent ankle injury. On the top right side of the screen, you can also see the compliancy box, and this is displaying the patient's compliance in regards to their appointments. So how many appointments has the patient been booked for? How many did they attend? Did they cancel the appointments, or did they no-show any appointments? We also have our next row of boxes below, and this is going to display our patient's information. So the box on the left side here, this is going to show the patient's demographic information, while the box on the right is going to display the patient's insurance information. And all of the information displaying here will pull in information that's defined within the MPI desktop for the patient. The next box is the resource group box. So this box will default in resource group information from the appointment type dictionary. So when we pulled in our appointment type, the physical therapy group that's attached to this appointment type, as well as the defined start and duration that the resource will be needed for, will also default in. The left-hand box on the bottom row is going to determine when the appointment will take place. So the first field is the search field. Clicking into the search field will then bring us to the search screen, where we will be able to define criteria to search for available dates and times for this appointment. In the search type box, we will determine the type of search that we would like to perform. So, did we want the system to find the first available date and time based on our criteria? If we were to go ahead and select the search footer, the system will find, excuse me, the system will find the first available dates and times that this appointment can be scheduled. Going back and jumping back into the search, we can also pull a pick list. So like we saw in that find routine, this will pull all available dates and times based on the criteria that we enter, as well as the number of results we define per search in this results per search field. So we have our earliest and latest date defined. We can say the patient cannot come in before 12, and again, they're not available Friday through Sunday. After we enter that criteria, we can then select to search, where we're given the pick list of appointments with the number of appointments per that result, per search that we found. So again, we could select our date and time. I can say that we would like to book this appointment for 1:40 this afternoon, and then go ahead and select OK. Or finally, we have the option of a manual search. So the manual will bring us to the resource mode. You can see here we can leave our date and time criteria as is and select the search button. And this will allow us to manually view the appointment or the available time slots that we can book the appointments for. So I'm going to go ahead and go back. And I'm going to select back again. And I'm going to leave our appointment date and time for the date and time that we found when we used that pick list search. There were a few other fields that I wanted to show you on the search page. So again, we are highlighted or automatically defaulting into a pick list search based on our access. Again, we can determine those earliest and latest dates as well as times for the appointment. So if we need to find a date and time for this appointment in the next week, we could change the criteria for that, or if mornings don't work for the patient, as well as exclude any days. In the location field, if there are more than one locations attached to this appointment type, we would be able to select which locations we wanted to search for available time slots for. We have the search footer. So as we saw, after we have all of our desired criteria defined, we can then select that search footer, and this will give us a list of available time slots that we can book. We're highlight on the results footer, and this is where the system will then pull in those results. So this is the page that's going to give us all of the results that match the criteria that we entered. On this results page, if we were to select search again, we would be given another 10 results that we could choose from. Selecting the criteria footer, this would bring us back to the criteria page where we can then define our search criteria. If we were to select the clear results footer, this will clear any results that we previously found. So for example, if we search for a date and time with day criteria, so for example, the patient can't come in on Wednesdays and Thursdays now, they know they have some things coming up, and we now do another search, Wednesdays and Thursdays will not display in the criteria. There is also the Check Resources footer button, and this is not going to be available for sites. This is a Meditech only function that allows programming to perform integrity checking. So I'm just going to search again, select my 1:40 time slot, and then select OK. So we're brought back to the booking screen. We can see the date and time that I picked now flow into the appointment date. If the user needed to pull in a specific date and time that the appointment needs to be scheduled for, that could be done by either typing in that information into this field, so you could go ahead and free text that in, or you can click the arrow and it would give you the options to choose the date and choose the time that you wanted to book the appointment for. So by choosing a date and time for this appointment, if you look up at the resource group box, you can see that a resource has now been associated to this appointment. So physical therapist Frank will be performing this appointment today. The duration and registration type fields, these are also going to default in after we pulled in our appointment type. So this is pulling in from the appointment type dictionary. However, if we needed to change the values, we could. So if this patient needed more time for the appointment, say they needed 40 minutes, we could change that here. Or if this was going to be a one-time appointment, we could change it to just a clinical appointment. I'm going to leave my settings as is. If a provider had defaulted into the provider field, that would be because there is a provider defined in the resource dictionary in the link to person field. We can perform a lookup in this field, and this will give us a lookup to the MIS person dictionary for users that are also defined as providers. So I can go ahead and select my provider. The next field is the comments field, and these comments are specific to the appointment. So for example, this information is information that the resource may need to know in relation to the appointment, such as the patient has a left ankle brace. We could also pull in canned text by selecting the canned text footer button, and this would give us an option to pull in any canned text that we might need for this appointment as well. I'm not going to pull in any canned text today, so I'm going to go ahead and select cancel. And then I will go ahead and select OK to file those comments. Oops, sorry about that. So you can now see that exists is displaying in the comments field to indicate that there are comments attached. Finally is the waitlist field, and this is where the user can attach this appointment to a waitlist. So this screen here is going to be reviewed when I review the waitlist later this afternoon. if we wanted to schedule this appointment with a date and time, but also have it on a wait list in case an earlier spot opens, we can add this appointment to a wait list and it would become a waitlisted appointment. On the next tab on the booking screen is the demographics tab. So this tab will pull in the questionnaire that's defined in the CWS parameters in the default reg questionnaire field on the facility tab, or it will pull in the default reg questionnaire based on the user's access if there is one defined. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this questionnaire just because it is pulling from registration, but this is where the patient's basic demographic information is entered. So now that all of the fields on the booking screen have been reviewed, we can now review the footer buttons. But before I do that, were there any questions? So it looks like there was a question in regards to what the Find Common Resource Time checkbox does. And I do believe that if there are multiple resources and locations attached to this appointment type, if we were to select this, I believe the system will go through and find times that would match across the board for all of those resources. Okay, I don't think there were any further questions. So we will go ahead and go through the footer buttons on the booking screen. So the first footer button is the conflicts button, and selecting this will present the user with any conflicts that pertain to this appointment. So in this case, we're being warned that this appointment should be booked as part of the PT set, and that's coming from the appointment set field on the appointment tab of the appointment dictionary. This conflict is just a suggestion, and at this time it's not being required. So if desired, we could choose to override this conflict. However, I will not be overriding that at this point, so I'm just going to go ahead and select that. The next button is the patient comments button. And again, these are patient level comments that are not specific to this appointment. The general patient comments at the top of the screen here are comments that will apply to all appointments, such as the patient requests reminder calls prior to all appointments. And then there's also the ability to define comments based on facility and location. So for example, if our hospital had more than one facility, we could pull in the individual facility and define comments, such as if we had a facility that was further than the patient was willing to travel, we could note not to schedule any appointments at that facility. For our Canton Hospital, we have a comment that the patient is going to need a wheelchair from the entrance to registration. Next is the instructions footer, and this button will allow the user to review the instructions associated to the appointment type again, both for the patient as well as the scheduler. selecting the appointment questions button. This will allow the user to review the queries that are associated to the appointment type. The Manage Auth Referrals button. This will allow the users to create new, edit existing, or view authorizations for this patient that can be associated to this appointment. So you can see here that the patient has multiple authorizations. If we needed to link one to this appointment, they could be selected and then linked. I'm not going to be adding an authorization today, so I can just go ahead and cancel. The pre-screen footer, I'm going to receive an error that there are no billing requirements set up for this patient type. And this just basically has to do with the ability to enter in appointment and order information, and this will go ahead and perform the medical necessity check. I'm not going to be going over the medical necessity check today. We do have quarterly WebExes for Med Necessity, so if you did have any further interest in that, that can be signed up for on meditech.com. And if we had free texted a provider into the provider field here instead of selecting a provider that was already defined within the MIS person dictionary, we would have the ability to select the edit provider data, and this would allow us to edit any provider information that would be needed for that free texted provider. And finally, the last section of the booking screen is the EMR section. So if we were to go ahead and select any of these functions here, the user would then be launched into various sections of the EMR where they could review additional information. So if the scheduler, for whatever reason, needed to view any medications information on the patient or any reports on the patient, that can be done using these EMR functions. So now that all of my information is entered, we can go ahead and file the appointment by selecting Save. Again, we are going to receive a warning that there are multiple recurring accounts that can be used for this appointment. But today, I want to use that new account, so I'm going to leave this highlighted and select OK. We're going to receive conflicts that the PT Bike 30 minutes should not be scheduled within 24 hours before or after the PT World 60 minutes appointment. I am going to override that for now, as well as override the appointment set conflict. So again, we're prompted with our confirmation that the patient was booked for a PT 30-minute appointment today at 1:40 p.m. And we also have our patient instructions as well as our scheduler instructions. So I can go ahead and select OK, and I'm brought back to the list of patients of the patient's appointment. The next function that we're going to go over is the pending function. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because I will be going over this later, but just to select it. This screen looks very much like the booking screen that we previously saw. However, you'll notice down bottom that the waitlist field is required. But as I said, I will be going over that when I go over the waitlist routine later this afternoon. Next, we're going to take a look at the edit function. So when we're launched to the edit screen, we can see all of the same fields that we saw on the booking screen. However, we also have two new fields, the first being the new date field. So if we were to find a new date and time for this appointment utilizing the search, the new date we select will pull into this field. So just to show you that, we can use a first available. And it's not coming up with any result. Give me 1 second. So if, say, the patient needed to reschedule for tomorrow, we could use tomorrow's date, select OK, and you'll see that the new date will default in. I do want to keep the patient's appointment for today so that I can show you the registration process. So I am going to switch that back. We also have the edit reason field at the bottom right-hand corner, and this is where we can pull in the reason that we need to edit this appointment. So performing a lookup, this will bring us into the reason dictionary where we can select any pre-built reasons. So for example, the patient is having car problems, we could go ahead and select that. So I can go ahead and save that. Again, we'll receive our conflict for the set. And then we receive another confirmation. The next function that we're going to take a look at is the change status function. So I'm going to go ahead and select my MRI of the shoulder and then select the change status function. So what this will allow us to do is change the status of the selected appointment. We're only going to be given options to select based on the current status of the appointment. So for example, if the patient won't be able to make it in on Thursday for their MRI appointment and we needed to cancel the appointment, we could go ahead and select cancel. You'll notice that the reason field then pulls in. And again, performing a lookup here, this is going to look up to the reason dictionary, where we can select a reason that the patient needs to cancel this appointment. If this patient or if this appointment was already registered, we would have the option to attend the appointment. Also, with the booked status, you can also see here that we have the option to pull in a visit status. So we would be able to pull in a visit status of where the patient is at the time. So, excuse me, I misspoke. This would be available if the patient could be attended at the time. So we would be able to determine if the patient has arrived, if they've seen, as well as if they've departed, as well as the times that all of those actions took place. You also have the ability to enter a change status comment, and these can be any comments that are relevant to the appointment status change. So for example, if the patient no longer needs the shoulder MRI, they're no longer having any pain in their shoulder, you could enter that there. So I do quickly want to go over kind of what the appointment statuses mean. So booked is an appointment that's scheduled with a date and time. Attended, the patient has presented and attended the appointment. Canceled is an appointment that's no longer scheduled for the patient. An inactive appointment is for pending appointments that reach the inactivate pending parameters. No-show appointments are appointments that the patient did not attend and the patient also didn't call to cancel the appointment prior. A pending appointment is the appointment does not have a date and time. A rebook status is an appointment that had a date and time but now must be rebooked. Waitlisted will indicate that the appointment has a date and time, but an earlier time slot would be preferred. Or discontinued is used for when an account with future appointments is discharged and the appointments will be discontinued. So we can go ahead and cancel our MRI appointment by selecting Save. And then we'll receive a confirmation that there are no other appointments or cases remaining on this account that the appointment was scheduled for, asking us if we also want to cancel this account, and we can go ahead and select yes. And you'll see that based on our display criteria, the appointment now dropped off of our patient's list. We also have the view function, and this can be used to view information about the selected appointment or demographic information that was entered. So we can confirm the appointment type, the location and facility, as well as the date and time and the duration. If this appointment was part of a set, there would be a flag in the part of set field. In this events sub-tab, we can see an audit trail of the events that have taken place on this appointment. We can also review our instructions and questions again, if there were any. If there were any associated appointments that were also on this account, this associated appointments would be available. Any patient comments, we can view them on the comment sub-tab, and we can also see any notifications that were sent out, so anything that was sent up in the event notification dictionary, as well as we have a conflict override history. So this will show us what conflicts were overridden and by which user. We also have the history button. And what this will allow the user to do is this will allow for the review of activity that's taken place on the account that's associated to this appointment. So you can see all of the information as well as the date and time information of when that activity took place. Before we jump into the set and remaining functions within patient mode, were there any questions? Okay, so we are going to jump right into set. So after we select the set function, you can see that we are given the option to either book a new set or create a pending set. In today's case, we will look at booking a new set. So I can keep that highlighted and then select OK. So a set is 2 or more appointments of varying types that are scheduled to take place in a certain time frame and in a specific sequence. There are 2 types of sets that we could book. We could either book a set on the fly by pulling in various appointments into the appointment fields here, Or we could book a template set, meaning a set that was pre-built within the appointment set dictionary. Today, we'll schedule a template set by pulling in the PT set. And that template set field is going to look up to the appointment set dictionary so that we could choose the appointment. After we selected our set, all of the information for the appointments defaults in. And we're going to go over the fields. So the minimum gap between appointments field, this is where we can pull in the minimum amount of time that can pass between the appointments if nothing was defined for the early start of the second appointment. Because we already have determined that the PT whirl cannot start earlier than an hour after completion of the PT bike, so we can set this early start to 1 hour. We don't need to define anything within that field. The comments field, as well as the reason for visit and provider field, these are going to function as we previously saw when scheduling an individual appointment. So we can go ahead and fill these in. The create accounts for pendings is currently gray because we are not creating a pending set. However, if this was set to yes, this would create a new account when creating a pending set. Because we're utilizing an auto search type as shown with the auto footer button being highlighted, we can enter in earliest and latest date and time criteria as well as exclude days to search for available times for this appointment set. So this is very much like when we were searching for a single appointment. We could enter in any criteria to help narrow down our search. Jumping down below, we can see that the reg type is defaulting in based on the default registration type set up in the appointment set dictionary. If the one acute account field is available, as it is, you can see that yes is defined, and this will keep all appointments on a single account. Or excuse me, this will keep all account appointments on the same account number regardless of their dates of service. The next two fields are the override reason for visit and the override provider field. These fields would be available for selection if we pulled in a reason for visit and provider from these above fields that were associated to a facility that does not match the facility of the appointment selected. So this would allow the user to override the reason for visit or override the provider or the highlighted appointment. Going over to the Detail tab, we are able to see details in regards to the resource group and resources that are attached to each appointment. So you can see that the physical therapy group is associated to each appointment, but there's an additional resource that's available for the PT whirl appointment. There are also manual type of appointment sets. So selecting that manual footer button, we're then brought to the manual screen. And for the manual appointment type or appointment set, This is where we will manually enter in a date and time for each of the appointments. So if we needed these appointments to be performed a week from now, we could enter in that date and say they needed the appointment at 1 p.m. and then 2:30. You would manually enter in the dates and times for the appointment. We're going to jump back over to auto. So after all of our fields and criteria are entered, we can use the search footer button to find dates and times for this set. So we can see here that we're given the option to book this set tomorrow starting at 9 a.m. If this date and time didn't work for the patient, we can use the previous and next footer buttons. So we can go ahead and select the next date, and you'll see that it'll give us the option for the next date. I'm going to select a time for Thursday. We'll start this appointment set at 12 p.m. And then I can go ahead and file the set by selecting OK. And again, I'm going to receive my appointment conflict warning, as well as an overbook warning because my physical therapist already has an appointment at 1 p.m., but we can override these. So you'll see here that the PT Bike 30 appointment is displaying in red, and this is indicating that there are query questions that need to be answered. So we can go ahead and select the appointment questions footer and answer any required queries. After those questions have been answered, this PT Bike 30 appointment is now displaying in black, so we can go ahead and save. We'll receive a confirmation that these appointments were booked in a set. So we're given the date and time of the first appointment as well as the date and time of the second appointment and any instructions. And because when we are brought back to our patient mode screen, because we are using the type display criteria, you can see that we now have an appointment set, and it's indicating that there are 2 appointments in this set. If we select the plus button, you'll now see both of the appointments that are part of that appointment set. The next function is the series recurring function, and this will allow the users to book a series of appointments, which differs from a set, as this will be multiple appointments of the same type that are scheduled over a frequency of time. So on the series booking screen, because we already pulled in our patient, Chris Tong, they will default into that patient field. In the appointment field, we can pull in the appointment type that we would like to schedule the series of appointments for, such as the PT World 60. You'll see that the reg type defaults in from what's defined within the appointment dictionary. And we can enter in our reason for visit, provider, as well as the comments. Jumping down, we are then required to define a from date. So when would we like these series of appointments to begin? I'll define this as tomorrow, so I can use T+1. And now we can either enter a through date, so we want to have a series of these appointments no matter the quantity until the day we enter, so say a month from now, T+30. Or we could enter in a quantity. So this says no matter how far into the future these appointments go, we only want to schedule this many appointments. So for example, we can enter 7 here. If there was a preferred time we would like to schedule these appointments to start, we could then define a start time. However, for this series, it doesn't matter what time these appointments start. The patient just needs to come in and have these appointments performed. We can leave that blank. In the frequency section, we can determine how often we would like these appointments to occur. So in this case, we would like Chris to have a weekly PT World 60 appointment. So we can select weekly here. And we will also determine the days of the week that we would like this appointment to be scheduled on. So if Chris was available for all days of the week, we could select all. Or if he's only available on Wednesdays, that is the day that we would select. So we could go ahead and select Wednesday here. We can then go ahead and select the search footer. So what the system will do is it will go through and find the next first available 7 Wednesdays, or in this case, it was only able to locate 5 Wednesdays that meet that date and that date criteria that we entered. So if all of these dates work for the patient, we can then go ahead and select OK to file these. We're receiving that warning that the selected quantity does not match the desired quantity. Again, because the system was only able to locate 5 Wednesday appointments up until January 4th rather than the 7, we can go ahead and select yes to continue. Again, we're receiving a prompt that there are accounts that can be used for this, but I'm going to go ahead and select these appointments on a new account. If we needed to make any changes to any of these appointments, that can be done here. But I'm going to go ahead and save. And you can see below that the system is now filing these appointments. We receive our confirmation, so the following appointments are booked, and it will list out all of the appointments as well as the date and times that they are scheduled for. So now, rather than the appointment set, we have a type of a series for the PT World 60-minute appointment, and there's 5 appointments within that series. So you can go ahead and expand that, and it will list out all of those scheduled appointments. Next is the orders function, and this is used to add orders to an appointment. So the user must have access to OM orders within Access to have access to this. And what this will do is this will add any orders to that appointment that we were previously highlighted on. I'm not going to add any orders today, so I'm going to go ahead and select to cancel. We also have the letter function, and this will allow the user to attach a letter to the selected appointment. Performing a lookup in the letter field, this will look to the letter dictionary, and the user can then select the letter that they would like to attach. So we can say the appointment reminder. It can also be determined how you would like the letter to print, if you want it to print single appointments or multiple appointments. We don't have access to this grouped field. However, that would determine how the letters should be grouped. So for example, should they be grouped by the appointment type, by the appointment date, or by the location? And then you would choose which report queue that this would go to. So we only have the option for the Allegro queue. I don't want to generate any letters for this appointment, so I can go ahead and select to cancel. The final function is the compliancy function, and this can be used to view the patient's appointment compliancy in terms of how many appointments have been scheduled, attended, no-showed, or canceled. So you can see here that this patient has had 48 appointments booked for them. They've attended 16 of them, but they've also canceled 11 of them or no-showed 10 of them. You can select these expander buttons or the plus signs, and this will allow you to see any cancellation reasons that were entered when those appointments were canceled. There is also the ability to perform select registration functions from the CWS Scheduler desktop. So we can opt to pre-register appointments as well as register appointments if it is the correct date of service. Express Register is going to allow us to answer the minimum required information. We can edit registrations, view forms and cards that are associated with the account, as well as fix registration type. If there are additional questions in regards to the registration functions, I would recommend reaching out to your reg specialist for further details, just because those do launch you into registration at that point. We're going to finish up patient mode by going into the footer buttons. So the first footer is the print list footer, and selecting this will allow the user to print any custom reports. So you would be able to select the report that you would like to print and then select OK. I'm not going to be printing any custom reports today. The list footer. This list button is going to display the list of the patient's appointments based on the criteria defined. So this is currently highlighted, meaning we're given a list of the patient's appointments. Going into the criteria, this will allow the user to temporarily change the defaulting criteria that pulls in appointments for display. So the defaulting criteria, everything that's defaulting here is pulling in from my user's access. But for instance, if I wanted to see any appointments that were canceled, such as that MRI appointment that was canceled, we can select that appointment status and then go ahead and compile. And we can now see that this patient has some canceled appointments listed. Again, that is just a temporary change, and that will not stick after the user closes out of the scheduler desktop. So the compile button, as you can see, after we determine the criteria that we wanted to view, we would select that criteria or the compile footer button, and that will recompile the list of the patient's appointments. The refresh button will refresh the screen, so if a patient was just booked for the patient, but maybe it wasn't showing up on their list of appointments yet, we could select that refresh button, and the appointment should then display. We also have the Go To Appointment on Grid. So if an appointment is selected, we can select this Go To Appointment on Grid footer button, and this will bring the user to the resource mode view where they can see the appointment on the resources schedule. I'm going to jump back into patient mode and close out of my comments. We also have the copy footer button. And what this will allow the user to do is to make a copy of the highlight appointment. So selecting that footer button, you can see that it brings us to the booking screen where all of the information from the previous appointment was copied from. So for example, the reason for visit, the provider, and any comments. However, we would need to find a new date and time for the appointment. And we also have the switch account footer. So this will allow the user to switch the account of the selected appointment to an already existing account number or to a new account number. So you can see we highlighted the appointment for today. We have the option to either switch this appointment to a new account or perform a lookup and select a pre-existing account. Really quickly, because I do think I skipped over this and I apologize, I do want to quickly show the registration process. So we have our appointment for today at 1:40 p.m. I'm going to go ahead and select that appointment and then select to register. Again, at this point, we're being launched into registration, so I'm not going to be going over these fields in detail. I am just going to fill out any required fields that I need to address, and then we will see how this affects the appointment. So I'm pretty sure everything is filled out. I can go ahead and select save, and it will warn me if I missed anything. We receive a confirmation, and my appointment dropped off the list. So I'm going to update my criteria to also show attending appointments. And you can see here now that our appointment has been registered, the account status is now a Reg RCR, but the appointment status changed from booked to attended. And this is because of the auto attend when registered field in the appointment type dictionary was set to yes. So that finishes up patient mode. Before we take a lunch break for about an hour, we'll return around 1:15. I just want to check if there were any questions. And we did have a question from Sonia. When I attempt to use the recurring routine, my screen gets stuck. At the bottom, I have a message that displays setting up search. What would cause this? Sonia, that sounds like there might be a little bit of internal corruption. We would probably need to look at that example directly. So if you had a specific set that you're working with, if you wanted to go ahead and open up a task, we can definitely look at that example. But standardly, I can't think of anything off the top of my head in regards to setup that would cause that. No problem, Sonia. Were there any other questions? Okay, so we will go ahead and take about a 1-hour break so everyone on site can go ahead and grab lunch or do whatever you need to do on your side. So we will return at 1:30. Thank you.